injustice.
And how about you, Kimberly, on the issue of injustice? You've had this experience that few of us have had. How do you deal with the injustice when it rears its ugliness?
So I try to make things just. You know, I'm just one gal on the planet, but I can tell you one gal on the planet can make a huge difference. Any one of us can. If you're aware of injustice, go do something about it. And, you know, that takes a jillion different forms, but I'm not a passive person. I'm very keen on writing injustice and inspired. I got to say, if anyone listening has an opportunity to learn about the life of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, day before yesterday I went to a play about him called The Beams Are Creaking. Now here was someone, talk about injustice, just one of countless examples. But, you know, a Lutheran pastor in Nazi Germany who lost his life in a concentration camp because he stood up as a person to Goering himself, as a matter of fact, in Nazi Germany, and said, no, no, I'm not going to feed you Jews, and no, I'm not going to turn my back on my Christ, and no. He had resolve, and wasn't going to play the passive game. He died for it, but based on the play and what I've read about his life, he was happy. He was in a prison cell, but the guy was happy because he was actively doing something to make a difference in the world.
How do other cultures view happiness? And not just what is happiness, but is it considered an important goal in life, or is it regarded as something that is simply less important than other aspects of life, or what? How do other cultures view happiness?
Okay, first of all, no need to call me professor. I'm just another guy. Call me Gordon, okay? But moving on from...
Well, I always try and acknowledge my guests for their legitimate accomplishment.
Yeah, thanks. It's... Well, okay.
Okay, Gordon it is.
Okay, in any case, that's an extraordinarily important question. And the best way to get at it is, I remember reading a book last year that asked the question, why are East Asians less happy than Americans? And to me, that was a strange question. They're not less happy. It's just the way the question was asked. If you ask that question in an American context, are you happy? People almost feel guilty of, well, I'm supposed to be happy. This is America. I'm pursuing happiness. Yes, I'm supposed to be happy. In, for example, a Japanese context, if you say you're happy, it's immodest. You make other people feel bad. So even in an anonymous questionnaire, you'll say, am I happy? Well, I'm not really going to say I'm happy. I'm going to be really quiet about this. That's the way people tend to be. And so you can't easily see inner happiness. Another example of this is when I interview Americans, very often it's almost like a self-promotion. People are talking about themselves in these, quick 3 or 4 minute bits of this is what I'm doing. In a Japanese context, though, people are much more shy and modest. They're not used to presenting themselves. So these differences are here. Now, is the underlying feeling of happiness the same or different? I think it's probably different, because more Japanese and Chinese I know would feel happiness in the sense of belonging to something and being a part of, for example, a family or a group. Many more Americans would say, am I happy? Am I happy? And so it's much more of an individual question, and it probably creates loneliness. Now, I, too, am an individualist. I believe in the individual, but when people are left in their own resources in the pursuit of happiness, probably it does make people less happy. And this is a particularly American issue more than in other places, I think.
That's interesting, because as you say that, it occurs to me that the cow could be perfectly happy being part of the herd, while, the shepherd might know more than being part of the herd, and being part of the herd might not be satisfactory for the shepherd. But for the cow, it's perfectly okay. That's essentially what you're saying.
Yeah, I agree.
Very, very good. Kimberly, you died.
Yes.
And you came back to life. Now,
yes.
I won't even begin to suggest that I have any idea as to what you went through or how it felt. But I'm sure it must have affected your view on all kinds of things. How did that experience affect your view on happiness and the purposes of life?
So I have a whole book about that, but to condense, 300 pages, a word that we haven't used in this broadcast yet, but Earth is not the planet Earth is not like, the place for happiness, but it is the place for discovery. This is the planet of discovery, which also can bring happiness. But we haven't talked about love exactly, and I'm using the 4-letter L word. It's what I learned being dead was that love is the glue that binds the universe. In Star Wars, it was called the Force. One might say God, or whatever your language is, or my husband, or my children, or my best friend, or whatever. But what really brings happiness all around the bases and to the home plate is love. And that's what I learned. I was in the greatest presence of love, which I call God, and came back with a big dose of it and enough to share with other people. And what the heck, by sharing it with other people, I have been happy. So, it's a matter of sharing, not hoarding.
And is that an attitude that you held before you had your near-death experience?
Not even slightly, sir. No. In fact, I grew up on the other side of this conversation. I grew up with money, and I was the firstborn, so I got anything I wanted. It could be afforded. My parents loved me, but it was like checking into a really nice hotel. We had staff that took care of the kids and all the material things in the world. And service came in 2 forms, sterling and what I could get. After near-death experience, I realized that even as shallow as I was, God loved me. God loves everyone the same. It really is unconditional. And to tap into that energy, into that force, I promise, will bring happiness in any life circumstances. You don't have to die to get it. Just create love in your life. And I have a way to do that. I'm trying to get to my recipe, but
we're definitely going to get to that and everything. But you don't want to shoot your load too soon, so to speak. You want to build up to it. Let them know what the problem is, and then say, "What's the answer?"
Okay, listeners, you have to stay on the line, listener. At the end of this broadcast, you're going to learn how to be happy.
There's something we talk about a lot on this show called the Hegelian dialectic. And what it is it's a political process designed to get people to do what you want them to do en masse. The first thing is you create a problem. Okay. Second thing you do is you promote the problem as a problem. And then you come in and you say, here's the solution. And everybody comes running. Now, we're not using this type of dialectic for nefarious purposes, but it's a reasonable formula. So I promise you we're going to get to your recipe for happiness.
It's so easy.
Yeah, these things generally are when you get down to it. They generally are ultimately pretty easy once you can get through all the stuff that prevents us from seeing it. Lee, you speak with people all the time. You spend a good deal of your time on the phone. I know you've traveled around the world, and wherever you go, you get involved with people. You converse, you talk with them, you interact with them a whole lot. What is it that you find today with all the people you interact with in terms of their degree or lack of degree of happiness, and where, why they are unhappy, assuming they are, or why they are happy if they are?
I don't know. I think it would be presumptuous of me as to try to define why they are or are not happy. But what I do find is that in the more advanced cultures, shall we say, that I find that people really don't appreciate one another. There's a lack of appreciation for the individual effort that is made by a clerk, by someone who is, quote unquote, doing their job, But people don't appreciate it. It's like they're robots. It's this thinging culture that we tend to have when we get so busy. We take others for granted. And the people with whom I've interacted, I believe that what they find in our interaction is that I listen to them, that I'm there with them, I'm present, I acknowledge them as another human being on the face of the earth, and that gives them a sense of their ability to open up without fear to me, just in talking about life on life's terms, as we say. And I think that's one of the other things that we have lost, and I think this is what Kimberly is talking about, is being of service might be nothing more than just being present to another person at the same moment, at the same time.
Gordon, when we turn on TV news these days, all we ever get is what's wrong. I mean, it's the crisis du jour. Whatever is happening all over the world, we get the worst of the worst. We get the misery. We get the anguish. We get the death and destruction. And we're bombarded with this constantly, especially when it comes to news. Does this have an impact on our ability, on people from all cultures, on their ability to find a place where they're happy, to find that happiness?
Well, of course it does. It has a huge impact. Misery is easier to televise. It's much easier to show a car wreck than it is to show something else, for example. But it's not just news. I think it's television as a whole. Think of how many times on television any of us have seen somebody get shot and killed. I've never seen that in my actual life in my entire existence. But on TV, I turn on the channel and I might see it 5 times in a half an hour. So there's something weird about the way that television and news in particular, but all of this does show us a very different world from what we actually live in, and I think it does make us unhappy. Let me give you one reason how it does, or one way that it does. It used to be, before there was mass media, that the suffering of everybody else in the world, we wouldn't know. We'd know our own village. That's what we would see. Today, we see the suffering all over the world. An earthquake in Japan, we see it. A war in Libya, we see it. And because we can't directly help, we feel guilty about it. What are we doing about all this suffering? It's great to have mass media in the sense that it unifies the world as one place, but it also gives us this feeling of guilt as we've had never before, because what are each of us doing to make the world better? Now, we can certainly justify what we do. We're contributing in our tiny ways, but still we've got this load of being world citizens in a sense that we never had before. And I think it does tend to erode away at our unhappiness much more than the past did.
Now, that would seem to raise the question that if happiness is a somewhat universal ideal, everybody wants to be happy, whatever it means to them, everybody wants to be happy, then one would think that media such as television would use happiness, since everybody wants it. You put happiness on TV, everybody will watch. Why don't we see